They said it like I wasn't even there. That's just how she is, my sister murmured, close enough for me to hear, far enough that she thought I wouldn't respond. If you've ever been overlooked, underestimated, or quietly dismissed by your own family, this story will feel uncomfortably familiar. Don't blink. Don't skip ahead. What unfolds next is the kind of truth that changes everything. I didn't turn around. I didn't correct her. I simply stirred my coffee and let the spoon clink once against the mug, steady, controlled. I already knew something she didn't, and I wasn't ready to spend it yet. It was Saturday morning, a little after 10, in my daughter's kitchen in Ohio. Sunlight came in through the thin curtains, catching dust in the air. The coffee smelled burnt. Someone had left the radio on low, an oldies station humming softly. Ordinary details. That's what made it worse. Betrayal doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it slides in wearing slippers. I felt it first in my shoulders, the way they tightened without asking permission. Then in my chest, a small, contained ache I'd learned to live with over decades. I kept my eyes on the table, on the faint scratch near the salt shaker, while the conversation went on above me like weather. She wouldn't understand anyway, my sister added. A quiet laugh followed. Not cruel. Almost kind. That stung more. I thought about all the years I'd swallowed moments like this. Church basements. School meetings. Holiday dinners where decisions were made before I was consulted, if I was consulted at all. I'd learned to smile. To be agreeable. To let things go. That habit doesn't die easily, even when it should. Across the table, my brother-in-law cleared his throat. Maybe we should ask her, he said half-heartedly. No one moved. No one looked at me. Silence settled, thick and telling. I took a sip of coffee. Tasted wrong, but I drank it anyway. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. At my age, the body usually gives away the heart. But not today. Today, everything inside me felt strangely aligned. What they didn't know, what I'd never shared because I didn't need the trouble, sat folded in a manila envelope at home. It wasn't dramatic. No secrets, no scandals. Just facts. Dates. Signatures. The kind of truth people forget matters until it does. My granddaughter dropped her spoon. The clatter broke the moment and everyone jumped a little. She looked at me wide-eyed as if she sensed something had shifted. I smiled at her and handed it back. Careful, I said. My voice sounded normal. That mattered. Conversation restarted, but it had changed shape. Words skimmed the surface now. I listened closely. Small things stood out. A hesitation before a name. A glance exchanged too quickly. They were nervous. Not of me exactly, but of something they couldn't see yet. My sister reached for the sugar bowl and finally looked my way. You're quiet, she said. Not concerned. Curious. As if quietness itself were suspicious. I'm listening, I replied. Simple. True. Her smile flickered just for a second. My daughter came in from the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, whispering. She stopped when she saw our faces. Everything okay? She asked. No one answered right away. I watched her watch us. Mothers notice things even when they pretend not to. I was just saying, my sister continued louder now, that some choices were made without much foresight. She said it carefully, like she was handing me a wrapped gift I hadn't asked for. She tapped her fingernail against the table once, twice, a nervous habit from childhood I recognized instantly. That small sound told me more than her words ever could. I remembered lending her money years ago. I remembered being told it didn't matter. I remembered believing that. Something inside me cooled. Not hardened. Clarified. I placed my mug down and folded my hands. The room felt smaller, like the air had been turned down. Which choices? I asked. The radio crackled between songs. Outside, a car door slammed. Ordinary life kept moving. Inside, everyone froze. My sister met my eyes for the first time that morning. Really met them. Her confidence wavered, then steadied. You know what I mean, she said. No, I replied, calm as I felt. I don't think I do. The table went quiet. Too quiet. I saw it then, the realization passing through her face, quick and unwelcome. She'd misjudged me. All of them had. And as she opened her mouth to explain, I leaned back in my chair, already certain this conversation was finally going to happen. I waited, letting the silence stretch, feeling years of being dismissed settle into something steady and usable. Whatever she was about to say, It wouldn't erase what had already been said. It would only decide who was exposed next. I watched her swallow, heard the room breathe, and understood this moment had been a long time coming finally. I watched her swallow, and I didn't rush to rescue her from the moment she'd created. The silence did the work for me, pressing in on all of us until she looked away first. I didn't follow her gaze. I let them believe I was still the woman who would smooth things over, who would carry the discomfort so everyone else could relax. My daughter broke the pause by clearing her throat and asking if anyone wanted more coffee. Chairs scraped. The room exhaled. Just like that, the tension was packed away, but it hadn't disappeared. It had simply moved underground. I helped pour, handed out mugs, nodded at familiar comments. I played my part carefully because I needed them comfortable. For the rest of the morning they talked around me instead of at me. Plans were mentioned without details. Decisions floated past without invitations. I noticed who took charge and who deferred, who checked their phone too often, who avoided certain topics. It was all information and I collected it quietly like buttons in a jar. When my sister laughed again, it sounded forced this time. She watched my face after every sentence, waiting for a reaction that never came. That unsettled her more than anger would have. I'd learned long ago that calm unsettles people who expect resistance. Later, while dishes soaked in the sink, she cornered me near the window. "You're awfully quiet today," she said, trying for lightness. I shrugged and told her I was just tired. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. I was tired of explaining myself to people who preferred their version of me. She nodded, satisfied too easily, and went back to the others. That told me something important. She didn't want clarity. She wanted compliance. I gave it to her, just enough to keep her careless. Over the next few days I stayed in touch like nothing had changed. I answered calls. I sent photos of the garden. I asked about my niece's job search. Every conversation stayed safely shallow. Meanwhile, small inconsistencies began to surface. A date that shifted. A story retold slightly differently. Nothing dramatic. Just enough to catch on the ear. One afternoon my brother-in-law mentioned paperwork he assumed I'd never seen. He laughed it off when he realized his mistake, but the way his voice tightened stayed with me. I wrote it down as soon as we hung up. Not the words. The feeling. At night, sleep came in pieces. I'd wake with my heart thudding, then settle myself by focusing on ordinary things. The hum of the refrigerator, the weight of the blanket, the quiet proof that I was still steady. I reminded myself that reacting too soon would cost me more than waiting ever could. I also began to see my past differently. Moments I'd dismissed as misunderstandings took on new shape. The memory didn't make me angry so much as alert. I wasn't rewriting history. I was finally reading it clearly. When my daughter asked if everything was okay between me and her aunt, I told her yes. I said families go through phases. I meant it. This was a phase too, just not the kind anyone else recognized yet. There were moments when I almost slipped, when an old instinct urged me to explain myself, to correct the record gently and move on. At the grocery store, running into a neighbor who mentioned a rumor in passing, I smiled and changed the subject. In the car afterward, my hands gripped the wheel harder than necessary. Letting a lie breathe goes against everything I was taught, but I understood now that truth has timing. I started keeping notes, nothing formal, just observations written in the margins of a calendar. Who said what? Who asked for reassurance? Who assumed I'd stay silent? Patterns emerged the way they always do when you stop interrupting them. I didn't feel clever. I felt clear. Even my body responded to the decision. The tightness in my shoulders eased. My voice slowed. I ate better. Walked longer. Control, I realized, isn't about force. It's about patience. And patience at my age was something I finally had enough of. By the end of the week, I knew more than I had at that kitchen table, but I said less. They mistook that for weakness. I let them. That mistake would cost them. Even if they didn't know it yet. The next morning, I pulled the old filing box from the back of my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Dust clung to the lid and made me sneeze. I sat on the bed and waited for the small irritation to pass, surprised by how steady I felt. This wasn't anger driving me. It was necessity. There's a difference, and at this age I know it in my bones. Inside were papers I'd saved without thinking much about why. Tax records. Letters. Copies of agreements I'd been told were no longer relevant. Back then I'd kept them out of habit, the way my mother taught me to keep everything just in case. I smiled at that thought as I spread them across the quilt. just in case had finally arrived. I started slowly, sorting by year, by name, by what felt important now instead of then. The sound of paper sliding against paper filled the room. It was oddly soothing. With each document, a memory surfaced. Conversations I'd trusted. Assurances given too easily. I noticed how often my name appeared next to responsibilities, and how rarely next to credit. Halfway through the stack, something caught my eye. A date that didn't match the story I'd been told. I leaned closer, adjusting my glasses, my heart thumping once hard. I checked another page. Same issue. Not proof yet, but enough to make me sit back and breathe carefully. I made tea before continuing, the kettle loud in the quiet kitchen. Steam fogged my glasses and I laughed softly at myself. 65 years old and still capable of being startled by the truth. When I returned to the bed, I moved with purpose now, comparing documents side by side, letting the pieces speak for themselves. By afternoon, the light had shifted, turning the room golden. I called an old friend, someone who'd worked with numbers most of her life. I didn't explain everything. I asked a few careful questions. She answered just as carefully, her pauses telling me as much as her words. "You might want to look closer at that," she said. I thanked her and hung up, my fingers tingling. That evening, my sister texted a photo of her dinner, a casual check-in. I replied with a heart emoji and nothing else. My calm response felt deliberate, even kind. Meanwhile, my mind replayed a conversation from years ago, one I'd brushed off because it seemed impolite to press. I remembered how rushed she'd been, how quickly she'd changed the subject. Sleep came late. I dreamed of long hallways lined with file cabinets, each drawer labeled with a year of my life. Some slid open easily. Others stuck. I woke with my jaw clenched and forced myself to relax it, reminding myself that clarity doesn't require force. The next day, I drove to the storage unit I'd nearly forgotten about. The air inside smelled like cardboard and metal. I found another box, heavier than the first, marked in my own handwriting. Receipts. Literally and otherwise. I sat on the concrete floor and went through them, ignoring the chill seeping through my jeans. There was not the whole answer, but enough to confirm I hadn't imagined the inconsistencies. Someone had relied on my silence, my trust, on my belief that family wouldn't cut corners where I was concerned. The realization didn't break me, steadied me. On the drive home, I felt a mix of sadness and resolve. I mourned the version of the past I'd accepted because it was easier. But I also felt lighter, as if something I'd been carrying without knowing it had finally been set down. My daughter called that night. She chatted about her day, her voice familiar and grounding. I listened, responded, stayed present. I didn't share what I'd found. Protecting her mattered more than venting my confusion. When we hung up, I sat quietly, letting the house settle around me. I laid the documents out again, this time with intention. Not to confront yet. Not to accuse. Just to understand fully. Each piece told part of a story that had been rewritten without my consent. Seeing it clearly was painful, but it was also empowering. I realized then that the past hadn't come back to punish me. It had come back to arm me. And for the first time since that morning in the kitchen, I allowed myself a small, knowing smile. I didn't carry that smile with me when I left the house. I folded it away, along with the papers, into a plain folder and tucked it under my arm. The sky was low and gray, the kind that presses down gently, not threatening rain but promising weight. It felt appropriate. This wasn't about drama. It was about record. I chose a place where facts mattered more than feelings. A small office with neutral walls, soft lighting, and chairs that weren't meant for comfort. The receptionist looked up and asked my name. I gave it calmly, the way I always had, and waited. My heart beat faster, but my hands stayed still in my lap. That felt like progress. When they came in one by one, I noticed the small shifts. Surprise first. Then caution. My sister smiled too quickly. My brother-in-law avoided the folder on the table as if it might move on its own. No one asked why we were there. That told me more than questions ever could. "I'm not here to argue," I said before anyone else could speak. My voice sounded older, steadier. "I just want the records to match the truth." The word truth landed softly, but it didn't disappear. I slid the folder forward and opened it. I didn't explain everything. I didn't need to. Dates spoke. Numbers spoke. Signatures spoke. I watched their faces as they followed along, saw understanding flicker, then resistance, then calculation. It was strange to witness, like watching a play from the front row. "That can't be right," my sister said, though her voice lacked conviction. I nodded. "I thought the same thing at first," I replied. Not unkindly. Just honestly. I wasn't there to punish her. I was there to stop carrying something that never belonged to me. They began to talk over one another, explanations overlapping, voices tightening. I let them. Interrupting would have been the old me. Instead, I waited until the noise burned itself out. Silence, I'd learned, has weight if you let it. One of them asked why I hadn't said something sooner. The question stung, but I answered it anyway. "Because I trusted you," I said. "And because I didn't know enough then." That landed harder than accusation. Trust always does. As they reviewed the documents again, I felt something loosen in my chest. I hadn't realized how much space this confusion had taken up until it began to leave. The room felt warmer. Or maybe that was just me. There were practical matters to address. Corrections to be made. Names adjusted. Responsibility acknowledged without ceremony. We spoke carefully, choosing words that wouldn't escalate things beyond repair. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accuracy. About no longer being written out of my own history. At one point, my sister looked at me and shook her head. "You've changed," she said. Not accusing. Not admiring. Just noticing. I met her eyes. "No," I said. "I've stopped covering for everyone else." That quieted the room again. When it was over, there were no hugs. No apologies worth naming yet. Just a shared understanding that something had shifted permanently. I gathered my folder, thinner now, lighter. As I stood, I felt taller than I had in years. Outside, the air smelled like damp pavement. Cars passed. Life continued. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the silence settle inside me. I hadn't confronted them. I hadn't raised my voice or demanded remorse. I'd corrected the record. And somehow that felt more powerful than any argument ever could. Outside, the air smelled like damp pavement. Cars passed. Life continued. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine, letting the silence settle inside me. I hadn't confronted them. I hadn't raised my voice or demanded remorse. I'd corrected the record. And now I had to decide what to do with the truth I'd finally claimed. I drove home slowly, noticing things I usually rushed past. The cracked sidewalk near my street. The old oak tree missing a limb. When I parked, my hands rested on the steering wheel longer than necessary. My reflection in the windshield looked familiar but changed. Plumber. Less apologetic. Inside, the house greeted me with its quiet creaks and familiar smells. I set the folder on the table and didn't open it. I didn't need to anymore. What mattered had already been said aloud, witnessed, and recorded. For the first time in years, there was nothing left to prove. My phone buzzed. A message from my sister. Short. Careful. She wrote that she hadn't realized how much I'd carried for so long. That she was sorry for her part in it. I read it twice. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. The kind that comes when someone finally admits the weight was real. I replied honestly. I told her I wasn't angry, but I was done pretending. That I needed space to let things settle. She didn't argue. That too was new. That evening, my daughter came by with groceries. She watched me closely as she unpacked them. "You seem lighter," she said. I smiled. "I am," I answered. I didn't give details. I didn't need to. She hugged me anyway, long and tight, as if she understood more than I'd said. Later, alone again, I thought about the version of myself I'd been for so many years. The one who smoothed things over. Who absorbed discomfort to keep peace. I didn't judge her. She'd done what she thought was right at the time. But I didn't need her anymore. The real twist wasn't what I'd uncovered on paper. It was realizing how quietly my silence had trained others to overlook me. Correcting the record didn't just change facts. It changed expectations. Including my own. Days passed. Conversations shifted. My brother-in-law called once, awkward and brief. He acknowledged the corrections without excuses. That mattered. My sister tried harder, spoke more carefully. Trust wouldn't snap back into place, but something sturdier was forming beneath it. I returned the filing box to the closet, but I labeled it this time. Not just in case. I wrote mine. The act felt ceremonial. I laughed softly at myself, then wiped my eyes. One morning, walking through the park, I realized I wasn't replaying old conversations anymore. The loop had broken. In its place was a steady sense of ownership over my own story. No bitterness. Just clarity. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always look like someone else falling. Sometimes it looks like you standing straighter, speaking cleaner, and no longer carrying what was never yours. I hadn't destroyed anyone. I'd freed myself. That afternoon, I mailed one final copy of the corrected records where they belonged. When I dropped it into the slot, the metal clanged shut with finality. I stood there for a moment, breathing in cold air, feeling something settle deep inside my chest. On the walk back to my car, the sky opened just enough to let sunlight through. It warmed my face and I welcomed it. I wasn't walking away angry. I was walking away complete. At 65, I didn't need a new life. I needed my own life back. And as I drove home, windows down, I understood that the greatest revenge I'd taken was refusing to disappear ever again. That night, I slept deeply without rehearsing tomorrow's conversations. Morning arrived gently, sunlight resting on the walls like it had always belonged there. I made breakfast, slow and unhurried, savoring the ordinary comfort of choosing my own pace. Nothing dramatic followed, and that felt right. Closure doesn't announce itself. It settles quietly like dust after a long road. I called my old friend, the one who had warned me years ago to keep copies. We laughed about instincts and age and how women are taught to doubt themselves. "You trusted yourself this time," she said. I held on to that sentence, letting it root. When I hung up, I looked around my kitchen and felt present in it, fully. Not bracing. Not yielding. Just standing. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't hardened. I was finished carrying what never belonged to me, and that freedom felt like finally coming home. I turned off the light, knowing my story was no longer theirs to manage, explain, minimize, or rewrite ever again. On my terms. If this story spoke to you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more powerful emotional stories about strength, betrayal, and the quiet kind of revenge that only life experience can teach. Your story matters, and it deserves to be told.